You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Linking American money in line with the price of gold. And that's what President McKinley does in 1900. In a gold pen ceremony, he signs the Gold Standard Act. And that feels like something stalwart, conservative, making the money not subject to change, right? It probably feels like all those things. The reality is different. The fact is, gold fluctuates up and down, as valuable as it's always been. Sometimes it can be less valuable. It can be cut in half. There's always changes. It does happen that with the Alaska gold discovery in the late 1890s, and with new mining techniques, it was easier to do this step than when McKinley first made his gold standard stance in 1896. You could do it without keeping money so tight. Yet, he signed it, and at that time made a lot of sense. It no longer does. And the gold standard is not something we even argue about that very much. Now, there was a little flare-up in 2012. It mostly had to do with Ron Paul and trying to keep the Paulites in the Republican Party. A little bit of flare-up there, but not something we discuss. And you might say, why? When did it all end? When did we stop talking about the gold standard? And, your first thoughts might be Nixon. He took us off that, right? And there's a role that Nixon played, and that's kind of true. But the final nail in the coffin, and the last president in office to seriously consider the matter is Reagan, and the year is 1982, in a very obscure commission and some activities that occurred kind of intra the banking and government world ended the gold standard officially. It's worthwhile noting that McKinley's action, putting the dollar on a gold standard, lasted for 3 decades. When in the midst of depression, Herbert Hoover explored severing the tie between the U.S. dollar and a specific price of gold, of maybe issuing some more dollars than you actually had in the gold reserve and tinkering with that a bit. His opponent attacked him. It was a libel against the credit of the United States, his opponent said, and that opponent was Franklin Roosevelt. And of course, one of the first things that Franklin Roosevelt does when he gets in the White House, middle of the Depression, is to take the nation off the gold standard. Roosevelt even comes up with his own price, $20.67. He basically makes up a number. But Roosevelt did something more. So in some ways, it's a little more than what Hoover might have done. Aware that just, releasing the gold standard, that might have people flocking to gold and away from U.S. dollars. Dollar might drop. So he also made it illegal to hoard gold and required people who had gold, individuals, U.S. citizens who were holding gold, to deliver that to their banks. And then the banks would deliver it to the Federal Reserve. It's to the point that the Federal Reserve bankers, who don't like this policy one bit, are even wondering if this should be done. And people are calling this an immoral policy. You're telling government, anti-American, you're telling U.S. citizens they can't own gold. It's even been said some of the pictures where you see people in the Depression lining up at banks, like getting there, some of those were the lines that people had to go on to sell their gold to the banks and then to the United States. A small exception is made for dentists who can keep some gold for fillings. Responses to this policy over the years have been mixed. Some say it prolonged the Depression. Most don't. Milton Friedman and Ann Schwartz believe it was the most effective thing that Franklin Roosevelt did. Gold is scary in our history. Gold can ruin currencies. It can ruin countries. if people there think it's too valuable. Cloaked in economics. We're really talking about psychology, and gold has something there. FDR was essentially taking that psychology away. We're not even going to let you own gold, so there's nothing else but our dollars. And he happens upon perhaps something else that countries in Europe, seeing Nazi Germany come along, seeing the price that America is paying for gold, and start selling their gold as well. In 1 year, the U.S. Treasury will go from having $7 billion worth of gold to $17 billion worth of gold. FDR's action, it turns out, as strange as it might seem to us, you can't own gold, lasted longer than McKinley's. Now, we would go back into having a relationship with gold. The currency would never be like a McKinley-style gold standard again. But that policy would continue. In fact, the Kennedy administration takes it one step further in two ways. They also ban U.S. citizens from owning gold abroad, and they engage in a mission dubbed Operation Goldfinger. Yes, so you have this situation during Lyndon Johnson's administration. If holders of dollars or other U.S. securities were to cash in their dollars for gold, the U.S. doesn't have enough. So it starts in the Kennedy administration, continues through the Johnson administration, and some Treasury officials in early 1966 say, look, if we just spend a few $1 million, we can probably get that from Congress. We could have several $1 billion in gold reserves. And they're convinced by a group of scientists, really hundreds of them on this project, that they can find gold in places that people haven't thought of before. Seawater, meteorites, plants. Scientists suggest you can use nuclear explosions to go deep inside the earth and find gold there. Or we can try to turn base metals into gold. This isn't like medieval alchemy anymore. We're going to use particle accelerators. That was the thinking of the time. They even have a name for it. Operation Goldfinger. Here's what a Treasury report says. The president's scientific advisors are confident of the success of the program and estimate that new gold reserves valued at up to $10 billion could be expected within 5 years. Many parts of the federal government are involved. They start looking in central Nevada at mountains that they haven't looked at before but suspected that maybe gold was there. Because sometimes little traces of gold were found in coal, the U.S. Geological Survey starts sifting through coal in dozens of locations in Appalachia. There's rumors that in Czechoslovakia, there's a plant that marsh horsetail that has gold in it, traces, and scientists look through that. They're not able to extract anything. They do find in Cortez, Nevada, as a result of this Goldfinger project, a mine that actually does produce gold. But the nuclear explosions to get gold in the middle of the earth and things like that doesn't work. Francis Bader, an economist in the Johnson administration, says it was a gimmick. It was a sideshow. At best, it worked as a psychological attempt to ease world markets by hinting that the United States, if they needed to, could find gold in other places. So don't mess with us kind of thing. If you're going to try to cause a run on our dollar. In fact, Johnson has the Bureau of Mines release a public announcement in 1968 that there's been a major technical breakthrough that would dramatically increase the amount of gold produced in the United States. Here's the point. Sometimes fiat money systems or just like creating money at the printing presses can be made fun of. Silver, when someone like William Jennings Bryan was advocating for silver money, that was certainly poked fun at. But it isn't like just because you tie things to gold, you're not without some potentially ridiculous situations and also potentially economically dangerous situations. The ban on owning gold lasts until the Ford administration. It's a strange way that it ends. Ford is watching TV, and a gold advocate holds up a brick and says, "Do you know I can't own this? It's illegal." And Ford happens to be watching this program. And he said, I had no idea. And he goes and talks to his advisor. They say, yes, this is still the current policy of the United States. He issues an executive order later, supported by laws from Congress, that it's now legal to buy and sell gold. And you can even, if you want, you can demand that contracts be fulfilled by gold. We are going to talk about quints. Things change during the summer, things cool down, and you look for different things to wear. What a great opportunity to change up your wardrobe a little bit. For me, I was looking for a website where I could get that new summer shirt. Maybe add a splash of color. I tend to wear black tees during the winter. But now that it's summer, I want that splash of color. All right, where am I going to get that from? Quints. Let's say you want lighter pants. Their 100% European linen pants and shirts are breathable, easy to throw on, and the summer upgrade your rotation needs starts at just $34. I have a pair of pants from Quince, and I love them. Now, make your summer wardrobe easier. Go to quince.com/myhist for free shipping on your order and 365 days return. Now available in Canada, too. That's QUINCE.com/myhist for free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/myhist. But it's Nixon, not Ford, who had already completely freed up the separation of the dollar and gold by closing the gold window, where you would go and could exchange, you could get a gold value for dollars, working with other countries. But if all this limiting sounds crazy to you, in the 1930s, the Supreme Court, which often limited Roosevelt's New Deal, did not do so with his gold actions. The Constitution, according to the court, is clear. Congress is in charge of the money. Money printed, money used for transaction and for salaries, monies in banks, checks up against a bank used to pay for services, presented like a dollar is, gold used to pay for things, all under Congress control. It could be detestable policy, could be unwise, could be immoral, as critics said about the New Deal policy, but Congress, the court said, had the power. Now, it won't be so strict with just the U.S. naming a price for gold and calling it all in after World War II, but you have the Bretton Woods Agreement. 44 countries meet in New Hampshire. The U.S. would be open to buying and selling gold. It opens a Treasury gold window, sets a price at $35. The International Gold Exchange has all other currencies tied to the dollar and the dollar to gold, but its money isn't directly tied to it. I mean, it is in a way, but it's really not. There's too many exceptions. When the dollar was high and U.S. imports became strong, hey, keep that tying it to gold. It's fine for us. Our dollars are strong anyway. When that changed and when countries like Germany and France got stronger after the war and rebuilt their economies, started to export to the United States, the United States didn't exactly use gold as an exchange, but didn't keep it as a standard, because what they would do is these currency swaps that would allow them some flexibility, in effect creating an extra $1 billion in revenue off that gold standard, in 1962 when they needed to. It was pseudo-standard, is the way that Milton Friedman explains it. And they would have a pool of European countries that could essentially loan through currency swaps to the United States whenever there was a reciprocal trade balance that required it. It does collapse, though, in 1968, two ways. There's a run on the British pound, and then also the French decide to stick it to the United States, Charles de Gaulle, president, and to just buy gold instead of buying dollars. Nixon closes the gold window in 1971 and takes us off that standard. Now, there is a shock when Nixon does this, and one of the moments is a French warship is sent to New York in order to get the French reserves at the New York Federal Reserve. But the most serious political move isn't there. It was in 1980 when the Republican platform pledged to look at the gold standard, and Congress voted to set up a committee. Some supporters of Reagan, most notably Jesse Helms, wanted this commission and really wanted to take a serious look at the gold standard. there's one meeting where Reagan says no civilization has survived fiat money. And coming from the 1970s, which were very inflationary, maybe it would be simpler to just go to money with substance. And he's thinking that initially. Milton Friedman is one of the opponents of this. And in a meeting in the White House, he discusses that. Today, fiat money, he tells Reagan, is taken as standard. You're right to fear inflation, but it would be better to solve the actual problems causing inflation than just to fix the means of exchange. That's Friedman's point. And it's another voice that says, well, why not a commodity standard, Mr. President? And that was Alan Greenspan. Reagan seems to like this. I used to pay $50 for a suit. Now, $50 will hardly get it cleaned. I don't know if that's true in 1982, but that's, There's a meeting in the Treasury's cash room where citizens actually arrived to exchange gold and silver to the federal government during the Civil War. And here Don Regan, later become Chief of Staff, Don Regan, as Treasury Secretary, says that this is going to be a tough issue and this commission is going to take a very long time to decide. That gets out in the press. It echoes an article in the Wall Street Journal by Alan Greenspan as well. We have to have more time to think through the issue and all its permutations. They end up extending a deadline that they had for 1 month to make a decision to 6 months or even longer. That pretty much kills the idea of the Gold Commission. Here's the New York Times, April 1st, 1982. The United States Gold Commission today formally rejected the use of gold in either the domestic or international monetary systems. The 17-member commission, after studying the question for more than 8 months, concluded in its final report, while there might be a future occasion when gold rolled should be enlarged, the majority of us at this time favor essentially no change. The commission did, however, decide to recommend that Congress authorize the Treasury to mint a new gold coin dubbed the American Eagle that would provide an alternative to sending dollars abroad for investing in gold coins issued by such countries as South Africa, Mexico, and Canada. The American Eagle would have no dollar denomination, would not be considered legal tender, and would be exempt from both capital gains and sales taxes. Essentially, it's a gold coin of gold, happens to be an American Eagle, but it's just a piece of gold. Donald Regan said at a news conference, in domestic policy, the majority concluded that under present circumstances, restoring a gold standard does not appear to be a fruitful method for dealing with the continuing problem of inflation. In international policy, the majority concluded that it favored no change in the use of gold in the operation of present exchange rate arrangements. Writing in Forbes, Domitrovic makes a nice point in 2012. This is after there was a slight revisit of the issue in the 2012 election. There was a minority report and a majority report, and the minority report is written by, among other people, Ron Paul, congressman then, not a celebrity yet. But the majority is authored by Anna Schwartz, who had written a relatively famous monetary policy book with Milton Friedman. It passed on recommending a return to gold. Instead, the report looked sternly at the Fed and asked for them to do better in their actions. My own hunch is that the Fed finally got serious about both not overprinting the dollar and not having wild gyrations in monetary production. In other words, trying to provide as much money as the real economy needed for growth because the Fed was scared it might be put out of business by the Gold Commission. New York Times has this little nugget. Inflation in the United States has been cut roughly in half since the commission was set up, and much of the impetus for restoring a gold standard has been lost. Although no essential change in gold's role was proposed, Mr. Regan said of the commission's efforts, they were worthwhile. Those who hold views on gold hold them very strongly. There you have it. So it's this very obscure 1982 Gold Commission that decides that McKinley's policy of 1896 will not be the policy now of the United States. Look, there's talk about inflation. Well, you see many prices going up. How it's going to get into the inflation computations and the like, we'll see. One thing that I think you'll hear a couple of comments about gold, and this is my history to beat up your politics, not economics, so I can't answer you for sure. I do suspect that there's too many problems with gold standard. in terms of using it as a cure for inflation. And then there's also this negative history associated with its connection to the late Gilded Age. You really look at a commission that was set up by a Republican president who had a lot of support at the time and was initially leaning for it. His Treasury Secretary, and he is the president, let the ideas of more gold bugs, like modern day gold bugs like Ron Paul, die on the vine. And that 1982 moment is really the last time you can say officially there was consideration of this issue. All parties now disagree with something like the Gold Standard Act that McKinley put through in 1900. Two topics of interest. I want to thank you for listening. The website is www.myhistorycanbeatupyourpolitics.com. We have a Patreon. Go there and support the show. www.patreon.com/MHCBUYP. Thanks for listening.